Stacy Kennedy is a nutrition and fitness expert, educator, and keynote speaker, with over 20 years' experience helping individuals, companies, and professionals with the latest discoveries in nutrition science. She's a board-certified specialist in oncology nutrition, an American College of Sports Medicine certified fitness specialist, and worked for 19 years as senior clinical nutritionist at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Stacy has also co-founded her private practice, Wellness Guides. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stacy Kennedy.
Hi everyone, I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Stacy Kennedy. I'm a registered dietitian, licensed nutritionist, board certified specialist in oncology. I'm really thrilled. I'm joining you from Massachusetts today and thrilled to be with all of you. We're going to talk about a very important and exciting topic when it comes to nutrition and cancer. We're going to focus on gut health, specifically your microbiome, as well as supplements during treatment. So I bet there are a lot of questions that people have, and we are going to go through this information together, and then we will have a good amount of time at the end for questions. So got a couple interesting things to kind of toss out to you to kick us off around gut health. And so, we think about gut health and digestion, we tend to think about just sort of, digestive issues, right? But our gut actually does so much more than, as if just processing our food is a small thing. It's a big deal. But our gut health is actually connected into so many more aspects of our wellness and how we feel every day. So about 70% of our immune system is actually found in our gut. And right behind where we're absorbing nutrients is where so much of our lymphatic system resides. So there's an interconnectedness between our immunity and our gut health. There are many links between gut health and a number of chronic illnesses. So things like brain health and diabetes, and really many chronic illnesses. So what we eat can absolutely have an impact on our microbiome. So we're going to kind of go over some key terms and explain a little bit more about what these words mean so that we'll all be able to kind of be on the same page as we keep going. So we can eat for better digestion and better immunity. When we work on our gut health, we're strengthening our immune system. And that's a really important concept to understand. So our gut has many functions. So we already just heard about immunity, obviously digestion and absorption of nutrients, but there are quite a few other things. So hormone balance is in part driven by our microbiome and our gut health. Inflammation is also linked with our gut health and the diversity of the healthy bacteria that reside in our gut. Neurotransmitters. So there's, sort of those terms that we've always heard, you have a gut instinct or, you have butterflies in your stomach. The link between our mood, anxiety, and depression and our gut health is emerging as very strong when we look at the research. And then not only does our gut digest and absorb nutrients, it's very involved in metabolism, which is essentially sending those nutrients around to do the job they need to do, which has a strong impact on our energy. Okay, so let's kind of don't worry, there's no quiz at the end of this. Everybody passes. But it is helpful to kind of understand what these words mean because you're probably reading them on Google, hearing about them on the news, and obviously we're talking about this today. So here's a little dictionary. So our gut microbiome, right? You can kind of think of this as like your own personal city. And the details of that city are different for everyone, right? And so we have healthy bacteria and just bacteria in general and other microorganisms that live in our intestine. Predominantly, they live in our large intestine. That's where they're supposed to be. Sometimes they migrate to our small intestine and can, have a little bit of issues when that happens. But that gut microbiome is basically your personal distribution or city of bacteria and other microorganisms. So probiotics are bacteria that may help that balance of the organisms in your intestine, but probiotics are something that you take. So it's introducing new bacteria that you're putting into your body, typically as a powder or as a capsule, as opposed to prebiotics. Prebiotics are fuel that you're eating, so foods that you eat that will help to feed the bacteria and the microorganisms you already have. So prebiotics are the fuel for those microorganisms. Probiotics are introducing new microorganisms to your body. And fiber, as we know, is super important, is essentially the non digestible carbohydrate content that is typically found in plant foods. So we're going to get more into what foods to eat, what foods may help in just a moment. But again, kind of on a high level here, I want to make sure that we talk about some of the latest research as related specifically to breast and ovarian cancer. So the gut microbiota is apparently, in terms of research, right, is influencing many aspects related to cancer. So the gut microbiota can influence cancer risk, response to treatment, as well as recurrence risk. And we're going to break these topics down further as we go. And certainly, if you have questions, we'll discuss those at the end. So many cancer treatments have been shown to shift the gut microbiome. So dysbiosis is sort of like dysregulation. So we don't want that. It's the opposite of balance. So when our gut is out of balance, we describe it as dysbiosis. And it goes both ways. So some responses to treatment, meaning that some research is indicating that resistance or ineffectiveness of certain types of chemotherapy drugs may in part be due to dysbiosis. So the gut microbiome may have an influence on tolerance to certain treatments. And we know that certain treatments may also influence our gut, right? So many of you may have had cancer treatments that kind of upset your digestive system. And so, as I mentioned, you have your own like personal city of these organisms. So yours is unique. All of ours are unique. So there is not a one size fits all like probiotics. So if you're hoping to hear today, hey, everyone listening today should take this kind of probiotic, I can't say that because we each have a unique sort of system living within us. But we're going to talk about things you can absolutely do in action steps, and then how you can actually get more information to understand your own unique microbiome better so you can then apply certain specific supplements or foods. And we also have this kind of ecosystem, but it's influenced not only by our environment, so how you're living, what you're doing, environmental things that we're exposed to, but also genetics. Genetics absolutely plays a strong role in the makeup of our microbiome. So what happens if you have this dysbiosis, and what do we do about it? There are a lot of things that you can do to help rebalance your gut. So plant-based foods are an absolute yes. Why? They not only offer us a lot of fiber, but there are a lot of key nutrients we're going to touch on in just a moment. Exercise can absolutely help our gut microbiome to be in better balance. And you might realize, or you may have experienced a time when you felt your digestion was off. And, maybe walking helps. Maybe when you're more physically active, you notice that you're less constipated or your gut just feels in better balance. And that's very true. Same thing with meditation. There's some good studies looking at how stress management and really specifically meditation can actually help to resolve gut dysbiosis or help to rebalance or keep your microbiome in good balance. As we mentioned, there are those neurotransmitters that are alive and well in our gut. And so we can tap into that potential and access it better when we include meditation. And that's something that, these all may turn into personal goals. They may turn into things you're just thinking about. I find it super helpful to do a little meditation right before speaking at a conference. So I feel like I have to check that box today right before we went live. Then we talked about prebiotics. So they're prebiotic foods. There are also prebiotic fiber supplements that I'll mention in more detail. And then probiotics are something else that may help, but they may make the dysbiosis worse. So we need to be really targeted. So we talk about eating healthy for your gut. What does that look like? So this should not be a big shocker to anyone. There's a lot of really great choices on here. So interestingly enough, non-starchy vegetables, as well as starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes, but non-starchy vegetables would be kind of those more fibrous options, right? So your cruciferous veggies like broccoli or cauliflower, nuts and seeds are incredibly valuable for our gut health. And they're really all good for different reasons. So, a client asked me earlier today, are walnuts really the best option for me? And walnuts are a great choice. They're high in omega 3s. All nuts have protein and have fiber, but they all offer different key nutrients that are healthy, right? So it's not just walnuts. We can, talk about why almonds are good, pistachios, etc. High fiber fruits. I find that many of my clients are struggling with misinformation they hear online and are somewhat a little bit concerned and feel that fruit might be too much sugar or might not be good for their gut. And that's actually not the case at all, particularly fruits that have a lot of fiber in them, which most of them do. So, mangoes, apples, pears, pineapple, berries, things like that. Legumes, so beans, lentils, those are great options. Those are like heroes for gut health. But if you find they make you gassy, we can, get into that in a little more detail. And then prebiotic foods, which we're going to look at in just a moment. But what about foods that can make our gut health, more towards dysbiosis? So it doesn't mean never have these things. Like we've got holidays coming up. You might just be in the mood for, leftover Halloween candy, and that's totally fine. But we do want to increase the frequency of the foods I just showed you and reduce the frequency of these foods specifically because they can disrupt gut health. So, processed and refined sugars, like added sugars, can increase inflammation and they can also feed certain bacteria that may be in an overgrowth situation and responsible for some of the symptoms you experience, like gas and bloating. Also, if you've had issues like small intestine bacterial overgrowth, having a lot of processed sugar is going to perpetuate that situation. So we do want to cut back on those. We know alcohol, in particular for breast cancer, but for all cancers, can be risky in excess amounts. Alcohol can also influence estrogen, and that is really mediated through our gut. And so it's important to reduce that. Plus, alcohol can kind of kill off some of our healthy bacteria. So we do want to cut down on that as well. So other ways we can support a healthy digestion. So there's a little repetitiveness here for a reason because these are really key behaviors that make sense. I'm sure everybody sitting here is like, yeah, I should eat more foods with fiber. Yes, I know I need to drink more water and I should get up and move more. But knowing it isn't doing it. And so what we really want to think about today, so my challenge and my ask of all of you listening is to write down or type into your phone a few key things specifically for you that you could do. So when I talk about hydration, what does that mean? So you might say, I'm going to remember to keep my water bottle on my desk, or I'm going to include herbal tea as a beverage after dinner. Or I'm going to try putting some frozen blueberries and mint to flavor my water because I'm on chemo and water tastes like metal. So think about, as I'm talking, actually try to think about a few very specific things that resonate with you that you could do. Probably no more than 3. 5 would be the very most. 1 would be awesome. We want to start moving the needle one step at a time. Same thing with movement. If you can't fit in a 30-minute walk or an hour-long walk, that's fine. If you get up and walk 5 minutes a few times a day, it's going to add up and help. We know for breast cancer survivorship, 150 minutes of walking a week is highly effective in reducing the recurrence risk. Okay, so I keep talking about prebiotics where you feel like, okay, I want to do that. What are these foods? And so these are some examples of foods that are especially rich in prebiotics. Now, all fruits and vegetables, all whole grains can be good for you. However, these are specific foods. Now, I bet there's a couple on here that you might think, oh no, Stacy, cancer patients aren't supposed to eat bananas. They have too much sugar. And I would love to help explain that that's really false. That is 100% internet myth. Now, you don't need to eat like 6 bananas a day, but if you want to eat a banana with some almond butter as a snack, great. If you want to have a banana in your smoothie or even half, go for it. Same thing with apples, oats. They have very helpful fibers that regulate cholesterol, appetite, help us with weight management. They're beneficial. If garlic or onions, like leeks are in the onion family, give you gas, you don't have to have those. You could have something else instead. And leeks are especially high in iron, which can be a challenge if you're in treatment. And ground up flax seeds, we know, can be very helpful in terms of estrogen balance for anyone who is looking for those kind of foods. Now, probiotics don't just come in pill form or powder form, they could be in foods. So there are certain fermented foods that, if you digest them well, would be fabulous to include because they may help introduce some new healthy microorganisms to your microbiome. So kefir is like a fermented yogurt. Yogurt in general also is great. You know, sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, kombucha. These can be very helpful. Now, this, I'm not going to sit here and read all of this, but what I wanted to do was help to capture some conditions that you might be interested in and share with you a few strains of probiotics that have been shown in research to be particularly helpful for these specific conditions. So like IBS, leaky gut, constipation, GERD is reflux. However, as I mentioned, we all have our own personal microbiome. And so there are some tests, some home tests that sometimes can be helpful in letting you know the balance of the healthy bacteria in your own microbiome. And that's something that you certainly want to do under the direction of a nutritionist or dietitian like myself or with your doctor. But you could research and look into some of these strains. Now, before you go and actually start taking probiotics, if you're in treatment for cancer, you want to run that by your doctor before you get started. But there's a lot of exciting research that's going on right now. So there are emerging roles of probiotics in the prevention and in the treatment of breast and ovarian cancers. And not like treatment like instead of medical treatment, but meaning that may help the treatment that you're on to be either more effective or actually to help reduce lack of tolerance to some of those treatments, as I mentioned. So we're going to take a look at some of these specifically. So before we do, I do want to mention when we think about research, we want to think about the quality or just where research is in the trajectory of the evolution of how clinical practice guidelines are created and how recommendations come about. So long process, right? So first it starts with in vitro. So those are like test tube studies looking at cell lines. And so what's been shown when we look at breast cancer specifically, so looking at breast cancer cells under a microscope, that certain kinds of probiotics have actually been shown in that environment to encourage cell death or to inhibit some of the growth of those breast cancer cells. Again, that's under a microscope, but very interesting, very exciting. Next step in research development and trajectory are animal studies. But again, animal studies, we cannot just take that and think, okay, that's going to work the same way for me because we're not, we're human animals, but we're not mice. And so things are going to work differently in humans. But the animal studies can be informative and helpful for moving on to the next steps. So with breast cancer, probiotics, again, in animals, like mice, have been shown to help reduce tumor growth and size, to help regulate, help the body's immune response to be better at fighting against the cancer, to help discourage the tumor from making its own blood supply, and just kind of in general other cancer fighting properties. So very promising, very interesting. And then in human studies, so those are now going on. And there are quite a few clinical trials that have recently wrapped up and many more that are underway currently. And so specifically, this kind of lactobacillus that I wrote up here, and then fermented foods, the foods we just looked at, those probiotic, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, those have been shown to help reduce primary risk. Helping to discourage the initial development of breast cancer. Ovarian cancer, this is fascinating. Since I was asked to speak here with you today, I've really been enjoying reading the research studies. There's a lot happening, and it's kind of a lot to wrap your head around too. But with ovarian cancer, the vaginal microbiome is essential. So we've been really talking about the gut microbiome up until this moment, but women also have a microbiome in their vagina, and so in the vaginal canal, you have a population and a microbiome as well as in your gut, and they're not the same. So this is a whole area to consider and to think about. And looking at risk for ovarian cancer, like specifically, there are certain sexually transmitted illnesses that are more likely to take hold or more likely to be aggressive when that vaginal microbiome is in a dysbiosis or out of balance. Many treatments, though, pregnancy treatments, other things can cause a disruption to your vaginal microbiome. So if you are experiencing recurrent or chronic yeast infections, or other issues like that, or just kind of vulvar discomfort, it relates back to that specific microbiome. And there are separate strains of probiotics that might be helpful. And it is also helpful to consume those pre and probiotic foods. Even though they're going through your gut, it can still influence the vaginal microbiome as well. So this is an area of emerging research, and in particular, right, looking at the link between HPV and development of cervical cancer, for example. Some of that is mediated by a person's microbiome. I know that's like a lot of science, so I hope it makes sense, but I'm going to kind of keep going, and we will have time for questions. Now, this is very interesting, and again, a lot of new research. So we're going to talk in a second about supplements specifically related to cancer treatment, right? But probiotics really should not be taken when somebody is getting immunotherapy for treatment. And so if you are receiving immunotherapy as a part of your cancer treatment, please speak with your doctor before starting a probiotic. If you've been taking a probiotic, make sure your doctor is aware of that and discuss it with them specifically in this context. So the mechanism as to why has something to do with the gut microbiome, but science isn't really exactly sure. But there have been some early studies showing that people who are taking probiotics may have a reduced effectiveness of their immunotherapy. Somehow through the modulation of our immune cells, we know gut health and immunity is so connected. So do exercise caution with that. Now, in general, supplements may be contraindicated during chemotherapy, as well as during radiation therapy. Some supplements are really important and really helpful. So it's highly specific and personalized to you, which is why working with a dietitian who's an expert in cancer is so important. One recent study looking at doxorubicin, cyclophosphamide, paclitaxel, with about 1,000 patients. And just keep in mind, historically, there have been a lot of research looking at chemotherapy and antioxidant supplements being contraindicated. So any antioxidant supplement, and this is a short list, like, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, CoQ10, different carotenoids like beta carotene, lutein, but selenium, turmeric. There are a lot of supplements that have an antioxidant action. Those can reduce the effectiveness of certain types of chemotherapy. Also, platinum drugs and radiation, any kind of radiation. So if you're getting radiation treatment for breast cancer, for ovarian cancer, you want to pause your antioxidant supplements during that time. However, antioxidants from food, eating blueberries, eating oranges, having spinach, is not only safe, but it's helpful. So the levels in food are different than supplements. They're not concentrated in high potency. Also, the distribution, how we absorb antioxidants from food, the presence of fiber, it is not comparable and not the same. But that can be confusing for patients. So often, the staff will let them know, hey, don't take your antioxidant supplements during radiation. And then people kind of understandably are confused, concerned, and stop eating blueberries. And that's very different. It's not what we're saying. We know that excess amounts of iron or B12 may be correlated with poor outcomes. So you should only take an iron supplement or a B12 supplement if your doctor is directing you. So your doctor, your dietitian might request a blood test to validate that you have an iron deficiency. And like a CBC isn't going to do that. If your hematocrit's low, red blood cells, hemoglobin, that could just be due to treatment, not necessarily due to iron. So there's a separate anemia panel that would show if you're iron deficient, and B12 is also a blood test. So the take-home message is, don't just take things because you heard about it, you think you should. You want to do your due diligence of that personalization piece. Multivitamins, however, just basic multivitamins, not with 1,000 added things or mega doses, but like a good quality regular multivitamin has actually been shown to be helpful across the board. So that's something that you could take. You may not need to, but would generally be safe. So I probably made it sound like supplements are like the worst thing during treatment, and that's not necessarily true. It really is personalized. So vitamin D would be a great example where a blood test would be very helpful. So I wrote the name of the blood test here. And if you may have had a blood test from your primary doctor, maybe from your oncologist, but if you haven't had one ever, then definitely ask. If it's been a year or more, then ask again, because you may have a low level despite not having as many risk factors. So risk factors for low vitamin D certainly include like genetics, but it could be where you live. So like where I live in Massachusetts, anywhere north of Atlanta. So even though if you're in California, you're still in a northern part of California. So we don't get as much direct sunlight for many months of the year, kind of starting soon. There are a lot of other risks. If you have an absorption issue, if you have like celiac or other kinds of IBS, sometimes even you may be at risk for lower vitamin D. But it's such an easy blood test. And we know that lack of vitamin D can influence breast cancer risk. It can affect your sleep. And we know sleep is incredibly important for our immune system, as well as, for our mood. We all feel better when we have a good night's sleep. So we want to focus on foods first during treatment. So I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of examples of some foods that are particularly beneficial for gut health and for our immune system. And so garlic is one of them. And now you do not need to eat raw garlic. You can cook with garlic, and that would be phenomenal. If you like raw garlic, go for it. But it's not necessary. Now, some people who have IBS or who have had dysbiosis occur due to treatment may find garlic makes them feel a lot of gas and a lot of bloating. IBS, that can be the case as well. And so if so, there are options for you. So you can get like a garlic infused olive oil. You can also make that. You kind of saute olive oil with garlic and then use like tweezer, cooking tweezers and take the garlic out, you get the flavor, you get the essence, you get some of the phytonutrients, but you remove the part that ferments in your gut and kind of creates more gas, right? So that's a good way, though, to think about if you might be experiencing dysbiosis, meaning that if you've always done well with eating garlic and now all of a sudden, after taking meds or during treatment, garlic is making your stomach kind of blow up, then you might want to start to talk about a dysbiosis or IBS or something like that. Turmeric, we know, is really amazing. Turmeric is something that you can eat. It looks like this. You can buy it as a root. You can cook with it. You can put it in your juicer, smoothie. You can also buy the dried spice. It's very helpful as an anti-inflammatory. It can help to repair and maintain the integrity of your gut lining. And it's also a very potent antioxidant as well. Many people take turmeric supplements. Again, that's something that you should personalize, but eating turmeric is great. And you can put turmeric in interesting places, right? Like if you're cooking, if you're making turkey meatballs or even regular meatballs or plant-based meatballs, throw some turmeric in. If you're having eggs, add some there, other things like that. So I really am kind of, I'm going to just push through really quick and then stop in like 30 seconds. We're going to get to questions. Thank you, Erica. So ginger is another great food, especially for nausea. Also promotes gut health in general, but particularly nausea. Mushrooms are rich in vitamin D, many immune properties. You can eat them. There's some fun kind of mushroom powders out there that are like coffee replacements. These are some really great anti-inflammatory foods. So fruits and veggies, but also salmon is on here as well. What about a special diet? Honestly, it depends. So this is where you want to have a conversation before you take on low FODMAP for IBS, before you go gluten-free, before you take on juicing, talk to an expert nutritionist like myself, obviously somebody that works near you or your doctor before embarking on those, simply because some of those diets can be helpful, but if you don't need them, they can be restrictive. So if you're struggling with weight, struggling with appetite, you don't want to further remove things unless you need to, but they can be very effective. And my slides all have on here my contact info. So my Instagram is at Stacy Kennedy RD. So I love to post helpful information for cancer survivors. So check it out. You can also message me. And I think one of these slides probably has my email as well. So anybody who has questions that we don't get to today, I would encourage you to email me. I also have like a free Facebook group you're welcome to join for more information and content on nutrition. But I want to go ahead and welcome Erica, who's going to share with me the questions that you've been asking. And I just want to thank everyone so much for this opportunity to be here with all of you today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stacy, for that really informative and interesting talk. We have several questions from the audience, so I'll go ahead and get started. So hopefully we can address most of them. To start, can you explain maybe in a little more detail how the gut microbiome might impact breast cancer, since the breast is obviously quite a distance from the gut? Are there any hypotheses about how that might work?
That's such a great question. Yes. And so it's kind of like lining up like this, then that, then this, then that, right? So it has to do with how our immune system is regulated through our gut. So our gut and our microbiome really has an effect on almost every cell in our body. So it is absolutely tied to the immune system. So our microbiome can regulate immunity. And so immune cells that originate in the lymphatic fluid behind our gut travel throughout our body to exert an effect. I think another way that's been shown has to do with, sort of when our gut is not strong as a barrier, certain pathogens can come in and can really have an effect systemically. So the gut immune connection and inflammation, because cancer really is a condition that has a lot to do with inflammation and kind of a dysregulation of cell growth and inflammation. And so again, that can be regulated through our gut. So, we understand that like our heart pumps blood all over our body, but we really didn't learn, until recently, that the food we eat into our gut sends molecules all through our body as well. So I'm not sure if that fully explains it, because it's like kind of complicated but interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. And it surely does sound complicated as well. I'm sure we have a lot to learn. You spoke to staying away from supplements during treatments like radiation and chemotherapy, but we have someone who wonders if you need to be careful with any supplements during hormone therapy for estrogen positive breast cancer.
Oh, okay, like tamoxifen and Femara, things like that. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yes and no. Like, it really is specific to each drug. And honestly, like if you're taking medicines for other reasons, for your heart, for diabetes, all medications may have supplement interaction. So you just want to actually kind of check them all to make sure that they all kind of work well together. There aren't necessarily there aren't really known supplements like there are with the radiation that are shown to reduce the tamoxifan's effectiveness, right? It's kind of more individualized. But I will say, like, timing's a big thing. So I talked about like prebiotic fibers being helpful, like as a supplement sometimes. But you'd want to take that an hour away from any medication, including like a tamoxifen, because the fiber can make it harder to absorb that medicine. I think melatonin is one that I'll bring up that's a little bit interesting. So melatonin, people take it for sleep, but it's an antioxidant. So if you're in radiation, there's other things we can do for sleep, right? So it is an antioxidant, but there is some early research that, or not really early research, there's research showing that melatonin may also have estrogenic effects. And it's unknown whether that's helpful, meaning that it's a weaker effect than estrogen. And so it actually, kind of mutes your body's estrogen on the receptor, or if it's detrimental. So like Sloan Kettering in New York has a phenomenal, it's called About Herbs. There's an app and a website where you can type in the name of the supplement that you're interested in, and it will show you some of these interactions, how it works, cautions. But they do list melatonin as a caution for anyone with a hormone driven or a history of a hormone driven cancer, because we don't know how those estrogenic effects will impact us. So like with flaxseed, with soy foods, there was extensive research showing, eating edamame does not encourage estrogen dependent cancer growth. But that had to be done and reported before we could say that confidently. So, I think melatonin honestly kind of falls in that gray area. So that was one I did want to bring up.
That's great. I was not aware of that research on melatonin, and very useful information about the fiber and the timing as well. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts about the microbiome and fasting?
Ooh, yeah. That's another super interesting topic. So there are times when, so for some people, eating small, frequent meals is highly effective and recommended and important. For other people, or for the same person at another time, eating less often can be better, meaning like giving yourself 3 or 4 hours between meals. So if you have a digestive issue, eating all the time may not actually be helpful. Like you might be just further exacerbating the work your body has to do, gas, bloating, things like that. So if you're suffering from, IBS like symptoms, even during treatment, it might be helpful to pace your eating out. But you want to like talk to someone about that. Fasting, there's some preliminary research looking at how fasting may help make chemotherapy potentially more effective. But again, it's specific. Like the research I've seen, I think is with cisplatin. So it depends on the drugs you're on, and it depends on your own personal risks. So if you have terrible nausea with chemo, if you've lost weight, if you're malnourished, if you don't have a good appetite, fasting would probably make those things worse, and we wouldn't recommend it. With the microbiome, it's kind of the idea of avoiding burnout, the fasting. So sometimes eating less, especially if you're not hungry, might be helpful. So it's kind of like, it's Friday afternoon, you're trying to get out of work, and your boss comes over. It's like, hey, how about one more thing? That's kind of like what eating late at night does to your body. Your body is trying to wind down, your body's trying to shut down, and you're giving it more work. And so you're kind of making it burn out a little bit faster, which can cause issues. Eating late at night isn't necessarily unhealthy because it's too many calories and you're not burning them off exercising. It really has to do with like more about inflammation and immunity and the workload on your system. So like an intermittent fasting ish idea maybe of like kitchen's closed after dinner and then eating, the next day, that might work for some people. But that's a whole great topic, fasting, that we could spend a whole nother session talking about.
Agreed. And I think we actually had a session about it at last year's conference, so maybe it will make a comeback next year.
Awesome.
I know you touched on the fact that it's been shown to be safe for breast cancer survivors to eat soy foods, but we have a question about whether estrogen from soy is different than normal estrogen, and maybe just a reaffirmation that it is okay for them to eat soy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an understandable concern. And listen, if you've never eaten soy in your life, you don't have to start. If you're worried and you're going to be sitting there eating tofu, like kind of freaking out inside, then don't, because anxiety and stress is definitely not good for your immune system or inflammation. But I want to try to help, kind of put some of those concerns to bed because there has been a lot of research. So natural soy foods, meaning like edamame, miso soup, tofu, those are not the same as soy protein bars, soy protein powder, like concentrated soy supplement kinds of things. So the natural foods have a lot less of the phytoestrogen than those kind of processed foods do. So they are very different. So eating edamame and eating a Luna bar is not the same thing at all. With the natural foods, it's not the same as the estrogen in your body. It's like 1/1000th, and maybe even less than that. It's a highly weak form that is thought to help reduce the risk of developing breast cancer because this much weaker form may bind to estrogen receptors in the breast and have a much weaker effect than the actual estrogen hormone in your blood, thereby kind of reducing the impact of estrogen, on that tissue. So like theoretically, it sort of made sense as being safe. Plus, we know cultures like in Asia that have eaten soy as a large part of their diet from a young age have a lower risk of developing breast cancer. But in the sort of early middle 2000s, there was a ton of research done in women with an estrogen positive breast cancer who ate soy for an extended period of time and validated that it did not increase their risk of recurrence.
Excellent answer. Thank you so much. Um, how might someone who is prone to diverticulitis improve dysbiosis of their gut?
Yes, great question. Okay, so with diverticulosis, there are these little pouches, and sometimes things like seeds might get stuck in them, and then that gets infected, and then that causes like a big issue in your gut. And it can cause like major, major issues that require surgery. So, what you want to avoid are kind of those hard shells. So, like a popcorn kernel or corn, or like, maybe an almond, but like almond butter still has fiber in it. You can cook certain vegetables. You could take the seeds out, right? So you could eat a cucumber and get rid of the seeds. So you can absolutely have many vegetables and many fruits, just being cognizant of the seeds, primarily, and going for options without them, or manipulating and cooking. And that's true too. If somebody's experiencing, diarrhea from their treatment, or just because that's your like what you're prone to, rather than having like raw broccoli, maybe you have very well roasted broccoli. Or maybe you're utilizing, butternut squash and sweet potatoes and some of those softer vegetables that have key nutrients that are actually really important specifically for breast cancer.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions regarding flaxseed. One is, can it act like an antioxidant, and is chia seed a good replacement for it if your doctor has advised you not to eat flaxseed? And then another participant wants to know if it's okay to take flaxseed daily if on an oral chemotherapy for ovarian cancer.
Okay, great question. So, first off, is for flax seeds, in order for us to absorb the nutrients, so not the fiber, but like protein and omega 3s that are in flaxseed, we have to grind them. So, you can buy it already ground up, or you can take like a coffee grinder and grind them. So, ground flax seeds these are all foods. So, if someone's talking about taking like a flax oil capsule or something, I would put that in the supplement column, but I don't even know if that's like a thing anymore. Most of the time, we're eating it. So you're going to put a tablespoon of ground flaxseed on your yogurt, in your smoothie, on your oatmeal, on your chicken. So that is a food. So antioxidants from foods are perfectly safe and fine. So you don't have to worry about restricting those. Chia, hemp, and flax are pretty interchangeable nutritionally. All three of those have plant-based omega-3s. They all have fiber. They all have protein. So you could feel free to kind of mix and match. And they're all really great for your gut. Flax seeds have something called lignans, which is like a compound in the fiber that's in the flaxseed, even when it's ground up, that there was a moment in time where it was thought of as another phytoestrogen, and it was thought that women should not have it because of concerns with estrogen and estrogen-driven cancers. That was like totally debunked, a bit ago. And in fact, again, kind of like the natural soy foods, ground flaxseed is, sort of discouraging of breast cancer development and helpful to include. I would just, if your doctor told you not to have it, I would just, and, you're not sure why, I would ask, she or he to explain that, so that you have an understanding. And if you still have questions, then I would sort of ask a nutritionist who can maybe help, translate that a little bit, or give you some talking points to go back, to the doctor with, to get some further clarification.
Perfect. You mentioned the Memorial Sloan Kettering website as a place to look up specific herbs and supplements. Would you also recommend that as a place to see if a specific supplement interacts with a specific drug, or is there another site that you prefer for
Yeah, that's a great one that's like free and available to the public. Clinically, there are resources that require like subscriptions that are kind of expensive, that your staff, that like I would use, as a practitioner, and the team at your clinic may use as well. But the Sloan Kettering one is really a great resource. And then, there's some information, but it's more general, like National Cancer Institute and other sites like that. But the Sloan Kettering one is specifically about supplements.
We also have a question that we've gotten quite a few times at BACC lately, I think because of a Netflix show about mushrooms. So what can you say about mushrooms and anti-cancer activity?
Yeah, there have been some actually really great studies. I just did an interview recently, for a publication about mushrooms. So mushrooms are awesome. They're definitely one of those like superfoods that are great to include. They're rich in vitamin D. So we know vitamin D is important for our immune system, but then mushrooms contain all kinds of immune supportive compounds. And you can almost think of mushrooms like the same way we think of like nuts and fruits and vegetables, like diversity, right? They're all different kinds of mushrooms. Some are pretty standard that you can buy at the grocery store and go home and cook. Those are great. And then there are others that come from around the world that, aren't in our grocery store, like chaga, lion's mane. Like, it's not like something you go buy and like cook up. And so there are all these new foods. They're not really supplements. Some are supplements, some are foods that are like powders that are often marketed as like a coffee replacement, that you can drink and enjoy. So if you like the taste of mushrooms, or you like kind of that earthy flavor, you can sort of look into some of these things, with the caveat, if you're on meds, you want to just make sure everything's like cool. But yeah, mushrooms have a number of different compounds that help strengthen our immune system to fight against cancer.
Fantastic. Well, I apologize that we have run out of time. We still have a few questions I did not get a chance to ask you, but I apologize to those participants. Feel free to contact Bay Area Cancer Connections, and we will do our best to help answer those. And with that, I want to thank you again, Stacy, for just a lovely talk. I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon, and we hope to see you again.
Great. Thank you so much. It was really great to be here with everyone. I enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Take care.